Well, welcome to the New Kind of Man podcast. Today, we bring on Paul Edwards. He is an international best-selling author and host of the Influencer Networking Secrets podcast show. He also has a mastermind that he founded and that he is the architect of. So we just want to give you a warm welcome, Paul.
Chad, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to, and you agreed to come on, and you actually get to talk about some things that is going to help a lot of men, but it's kind of some unfamiliar topics. So I'm really interested, not only for my personal value, but also all the listeners, to talk about being an entrepreneur, what that means, how to network, and this is your specialty. But before we talk about your work, I would like for you to talk about some of your family dynamics. What's going on at home?
Well, we're like just about everybody else on the planet right now in a very interesting season that we've never been in before. But oddly enough, one of my favorite things to tell people, I realize this might sound all far too optimistic, but we're really doing really good. Awesome. For the most part. My soul is well. My wife and my children are well. We've barely lost any momentum. I had one client sort of back out for a while, which was, is what it is. But for the most part, life is on the increase for us. So contrary to what the news media might have you believe, I'm glad I stuck around to see this. I'm glad I'm still here and I'm still operating as part of the kingdom for it.
Awesome. We need as much optimism as we can get. I was wondering also, how many years have you been married? You said your wife and then 2 kids. How long have you been married and how old are your kids?
15 years, and I have boys of 9 and 11.
Awesome. 15 years. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. I have a whole separate story I can tell on that at some other point if you'd like to hear it. I'm eager to demonstrate to men especially that God left us a blueprint for how to acquire the perfect wife, and if we would just follow it instead of misreading it as a historical narrative, we might actually get somewhere. But another story for another day.
Yeah, perhaps. I'm free. You can jump into it. That sounds meaty. Sounds helpful.
Well, the short and the shallow, and I don't want anyone to hear any sort of finger pointing or accusation or you did it wrong. This is mainly if you are still unattached. If you're married, you're married, and that's it, right? Divorce is not allowed. Murder's okay, but not divorce. So my wife and I have that running joke between us. But anyway, God leaves this blueprint. 17, 18 years in a church setting, one church setting after another. And instead I learned from a wise old Jewish rabbi that the Torah is actually a blueprint of God's intended way for man to live. It's not just a historical narrative, though it does contain historical facts. And it's not the incessant babbling of bored Bedouins. Right. It's actual observations about what is truest about our experience. So early on in the earliest chapters, God says, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper who will make a companion who will help him. But he doesn't immediately shift to that. The next thing God does is he has Adam name all the animals. And the rabbinic tradition observes that this is a way for Adam to distinguish humanity from animals. Although we share some characteristics with them in our physical bodies, we are by no means of them. There's a profound, vast, immeasurable spiritual difference between us and them. Anyway, that's not the subject. After Adam gets done with that, then God does go to work creating Eve, but he does this interesting thing. He puts Adam to sleep, right? And makes Eve while Adam's not paying attention, not even conscious of her, got his back turned and his eyes closed. And all Adam's just off there, la, 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 in dreamy dreamland, right? And it's and if any of you ladies are listening, this is, and then the Lord God formed the woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Formed as in took his time and formed her. So she has her own process of maturing and growing up to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then he brings her to the man. This is what happened to me. I shut off my love life. I didn't go dating, wasn't looking for it, wasn't interested. People, I even had some overtures of interest from certain members of the opposite sex, never took him up on it, never even entertained the thought. Just said, nope, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. God will tell me when I'm ready. Now, I was 22 at the time. I joined the military. I go over and get stationed in Germany with the Army. I start going to this church, and it was a pretty fundamentalist kind of church. It was, ladies only wear long skirts and we only play old time music and yada, yada, yada. But the point is, in this church was this beautiful young woman who I assumed was married to another soldier. And so I said, yep, not going anywhere near that. And I ignored her for the first several months I knew her. And then one day I started getting these kind of vague hints from the pastor himself, who eventually had to just stop being with the vague hints and say, look, you have an opportunity here. She likes you.
Sometimes we just need a 2x4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's like we don't get the gentle nudge. So we're like, here's the 2x4. This is what I'm trying to get your attention for.
Well, because I'd already made the decision in my head.
Sure.
Right? I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to clubs. I'm not asking for phone numbers. I'm not pulling, sweet lines and moves. I'm not doing the whole hookup culture, which was then starting to really catch fire. None of that. And boy, I could tell you the attributes and the long-lasting value and the noble character of the woman I married till we're blue in the face, but we'd run out of time. Suffice it to say, the heart of this woman's husband safely trusts her, as it says in Proverbs 31. And that's really hard to come by, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, it's a rarity. It is a rarity, especially in the day and age of throwaway marriages and just, throw it away, get another one. And, the microwave culture has definitely made its way into our lives relationally. Mm-hmm. So you'd mentioned that you were in the Army. So, and also after doing some research that I found that you're a combat vet. So I just wanted to say thanks for that. Thanks for serving. And,
my pleasure.
Yeah. And one vet to another. I appreciate what you did and how you served and all of that. It's pretty cool. Also said that in your bio says that you lived in 5 different countries. What were they? That's an interesting little tidbit.
Well, quickly to return the gratitude also for your service. That's very important. That carries a lot more weight than I think we often realize as veterans. We tend to think, oh, it's just something I did. No, it's not. It's actually carries quite a bit more than that. 5 different countries. I'm Canadian born. I was born in Alberta, Canada, and lived there the first 8 years of my life. We immigrated to the United States in 1988, and I lived there in Los Angeles, in various parts of the greater Los Angeles area, till 2001.
Okay.
And I had an opportunity, because my dad is British, I had an opportunity to go and live in England because he could bequeath British citizenship to me, which he chose to do. And I had this British passport, and I said, a mentor of mine at the time said, you might as well use it because you've got it. And so I did. And I went and lived in England for nearly a year and a half. And then I joined the military on the condition that they would station me in Europe. And I knew nothing about the military. Otherwise, I probably would have joined the Air Force, because they actually had encampments in England.
Oh, wow.
But
yeah.
But the Army didn't. And they said, well, we can send you to Germany. And I said, oh, okay, sounds good. Let's go to Germany. And I went to Germany. Of course, the reason they sent me to Germany was because they desperately needed personnel to fill units that were deploying to Iraq. And so that was the 5th country I went and lived in, was Iraq itself. And that I did on 2 separate occasions for at least a year at a time.
Wow.
So there you go.
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. That's awesome. I just thought it was interesting. 5 different countries. You know, prior to recording, you pretty much pinpointed my accent, my dialect, and where you knew the region I was from. And you said bean earlier instead of bin, and I was like, yes, I knew. And then once you said a connection with Canada, I was like, you know what? Maybe I have some of the same abilities that you do, because I picked that up really quickly. I was like, I don't know. It is close to Washington. Washington is where you are now, right?
Where I live,
Yeah.
yes. Actually, yeah, I found that particularly the Midwest and the North, the tundra states like Minnesota
Mm.
and Wisconsin, they I have to listen closely. Sometimes I can confuse them with Canadians if I'm not careful.
Hmm. Wow, interesting. Yeah, I could definitely see that a little bit, especially a little bit farther north. With me being from Illinois, somebody was from Wisconsin or Minnesota, and like they just have that certain little dialect. I'm not making, if you're from there, I'm not making fun of you. It's just how I hear it.
Yep.
And so, but I don't know. I mean, wherever we live, we think that dialect's normal, and everybody else is weird, right? I mean, that's just, I mean, that's just kind
Yeah.
of the way we are.
Yep.
So
Yep.
interesting stuff. Well, when I was kind of digging into your story, I kind of found this part of your story that I thought was interesting. That would be a good segue before we get into entrepreneurship and all those types of things. But uh, so the 4 pillars of the work at New Kind of Man have to do with the relationships, spiritual growth, intellectual growth, and also relational, physical, spiritual, and intellectual. So I know that you've been on a fitness journey,
Hmm.
and I would just like for you to talk about that just a little bit, like what you're doing, where you started, and maybe why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, you could say this stretches back to right around that same time when I met my wife. When I was 20 years old, I found myself in a unique situation living with a mentor who was very observant and very critical of my habits of. I had a lot of habits of very poor choices of what I did with
Mm,
my life and how I treated myself and all that.
mm,
And one of the things that he managed to talk me into, just because it was easier to follow his advice than to listen to him constantly critique how I chose to behave, was to change my diet. And
mm.
so between September of 2000 and October of 2001, when I left, because I lived with him, he was a quadriplegic multimillionaire. So he
Oh, wow.
asked me to, the exchange was room and board in exchange for assisting him with physical tasks he couldn't perform himself.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the things that happened to me was I lost about 60 pounds
Mm.
because I got used to eating just once a day, and what I ate was enough to keep me alive, and it wasn't like starvation diet, but it wasn't far from it. I mean,
Yeah.
especially in comparison to the way I had been eating. So I wasn't really, for some reason, I don't know why I didn't anticipate this or didn't see it coming, but I started turning female heads everywhere I went.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, well, that's nice. I've never done that before. So when I went to London, this is the fall of 2001, it was a unique time. And I made a decision that I was going to start living a much more active lifestyle. I stopped smoking just 8 days after I got there. I quit cold turkey after 5.5 years of pack a
Mm.
day smoking,
Wow.
and I started going swimming, and then I started going to gyms and training, and I started playing squash and racquetball, and summertime I would go and play roller hockey, and I just became a very physically active person, one way or
Mm.
the other. Then I joined the Army. Of course, you have to be physically active there. So I ran thousands of miles and did thousands of push-ups and sit-ups and all that.
Mhm.
And eventually got into lifting weights because I've always been just pretty much like I call it ectomorph limbs with an endomorph abdomen. So I just put on weight in my stomach and my face, and then my limbs just stay skinny. Yeah. And I started doing that for a while. Then, got out of the Army. Eventually, found my way into trying powerlifting. But I found I wasn't really built for that either. Right? I was too skinny. I couldn't accommodate the tremendous amounts of weight like a guy with much thicker limbs can. So I switched to bodybuilding, and after a while of trying to figure it out on my own and still just mostly getting more belly fat, I said that's enough of this. I can't. I remember this. This is what triggered it. As I complained in a Facebook group to some friends of mine one day. I said, there has to be more to it than this. I can't just. It can't be just because my name is Paul Edwards that I can't lose belly fat and look lean and muscular. That's not a good enough reason, because there's millions of people doing it, right? Well, maybe not millions, but at least thousands. Anyway, a few weeks later, I get this ad in my Facebook news feed. Are you tired of going to the gym 4 to 6 nights a week and not making any progress? And I said, hell yes, I am.
That's me.
And it was an ad from Vince Del Monte, who became my fitness coach and a mentor, and then I joined his business mastermind. As I moved out of my job, I had been selling insurance for about 6 years at that point, and not really getting anywhere with it. So I transitioned into entrepreneurship, and I joined Vince's mastermind, and that's pretty much, fast forward right to 2018. That's where this whole entrepreneurial journey picked up for me.
Interesting. So all that's woven together. I think that's great. Of just, you said Vince, and what was his last name?
Del Monte.
Del Monte. Yeah, it's just really interesting how all of that tied together, and then it became really, or it was the thing that shaped you into what you're doing and who you are now. Because now you're strong in the entrepreneur space. You're trying to help people with networking skills, and now you've written books about it. The first book, I think it was the first book that you wrote, was The 10 Secrets to Networking Success. And was a lot of that just kind of things you learned along the line from Vince and from others, or was this from your experience in selling insurance?
Both, but I should back up the story here. I didn't do Vince enough credit there, and if he hears this, he might sue. I started doing Vince's program, and I lost 15 percentage points of body fat. I went from 26% body fat to 11.
Wow.
Just by following his nutrition protocol. I was doing his workout training as well. But that was what got me into the shape I'm in now, where now I've competed in a couple of bodybuilding shows as a physique competitor, and had people reach out to me and ask me, how do you do it, and all that kind of stuff. And this is purely a hobby for me. I'm never going to do it as a business. So
sure.
Anyway, but the insurance business taught me a very good foundational set of networking skills, which is where that first book comes from, which now that I'm working on releasing my third this summer, you kind of look back at your first work and you're like, I hope nobody ever finds that. And here we are, you found it, and now we're talking about it. But I have to be kind to myself. At the time, that's what I knew, and that's what I had the budget to put together. And among my network here in Olympia, Washington, sold quite well. And I attracted a bunch of people to a launch where I, made an offer of a continued coaching opportunity. And I thought, maybe that's how I'll do it. But at the same time, I was in Vince's mastermind. I wanted to take it to a much larger level and attract a much larger audience and build a mailing list and, start to sell products online and all that kind of thing. And that didn't go the way I thought it would. It went well, but it didn't go the way I thought it would. And anyway, so I continued to use the skills, that foundational skill level that I had going into Vince's mastermind. But what I quickly figured out while I was in it was that I had a lot of growing and improving that I could do. and figuring out ways to begin to make myself into that that high level connector,
Hmm.
right? That person who knows person A and person B, but person A and person B are not just two people on the street. These are people, leading organizations or very high up on the influence chain, people you see on national television, international best-selling authors and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I knew how to get, I knew enough to be able to get a lot of them to at least appear on my show, which gives me an opportunity to be in front of them, which
Right.
gives me an opportunity not only to connect them with other people I know, but also to get a few minutes to talk about what I'm up to as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's great. Actually, that was a really good segue because one of the secrets that you talk about is how to make yourself as frequent and visible as a TV or a radio or TV commercial.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you can just draw to mind, but I was wondering, you kind of spoke into that a little bit of just kind of making yourself known in that way. What are some things that, I have a lot of people who are going to listen to this. They're small business owners, they're podcasters, kind of run the gambit there. And they're always looking for, okay, what's the edge? How can I make my brand noticed? How can I make myself to be noticed? Not in a prideful, self-inflating type of way, but, it's a business plan. They're trying to market. They're trying to make themselves shine, amongst their whatever their particular field is. So, could you speak into that just a little bit?
Yeah, there's really, in my opinion, there's two ways to do this, and one the one way is for 0.01% of the population. So if you are that loud, charismatic, over the top, engaging, energizing personality, right? Um, and we see these people all over the internet. You just got to look for them,
Yeah.
right? They're there. Um, that highly influential, larger than life personality
Hmm.
who can literally start up a conversation and make a sale 2 minutes later.
Right.
Um, then by all means do it, right? If that's your royal jelly, then by all means exploit it. If God gave you that gift, do it.
Charisma, right? I mean, if it
Yeah,
is that
well,
what you mean
it's
by that?
no, because I think the rest of us can have charisma too. That is
Okay.
when you have a ridiculous surplus abundance of it,
Okay.
right? And to give you a simple illustration of this, um, I've had John Corcoran on my show twice, and he
Hmm.
is former Clinton White House speechwriter. And the way he described it was that Bill Clinton could walk into one large room full of people after another and draw all of the attention on him and make them all feel like they were interacting with him personally. And he could do that for one day, after one room after another, 8 rooms in a row and never get tired of it.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking I might last 15 minutes in one room
Right.
because I'm what I consider a fairly extroverted person, but I'm not like that.
Right.
Right. So that's all I'm saying is if you are the type of person who, could just go for days on end, gum flapping and exchanging with people, and they just automatically want to buy from you. Great. I'm not
Mhm.
knocking that. I don't think it's fake, but 99.9% of us aren't in that
Yeah.
category.
That's the 0.1%, right? So that guy, he's that guy or gal, they're on their own. They're gonna find it. But what about the rest of us?
So for the rest of us, there's a much it's a much more subtle approach.
Okay.
And the way I found that this began to work for me was I'm in a sizable mid-sized town, I guess you would say. That's how I would characterize Olympia. It's not as big
Hmm.
as Seattle, but but there's plenty of business to be had here.
Hmm.
And I'm going to these business networking groups. I'm going anywhere there's business owners. Um, And what I found was I could stay in front of them much longer than the average person
Hmm.
by virtue of the fact that I could connect with them over social media. but I also knew what to say when I got on social media that made it interesting.
Hmm.
In the first mastermind I was in, it was called the Agency Alliance Mastermind. I had a mentor there named Jonathan Garrick, and Jonathan said to me something very interesting. He said, when you get on Facebook, don't talk about insurance. Whatever you do, don't talk about insurance.
Hmm.
And I said, well, what am I supposed to talk about? And he said, well, listen, they already know what you do. It's listed on your profile. They can read that. What they don't know is what kind of person you are. They don't know much about your family, maybe. They don't know what's your sense of humor like. They don't know what you care about. You know, they don't know your likes and dislikes. They, share that with them. Share your successes. Share your adventures. Share where you go and what you get up to. Right.
Hmm.
Well, as soon as I started doing that, I started having this huge, I shouldn't say huge, but huge for this local business community following.
Sure.
And it became so predictable and so routine. I was so consistent and so relentless with it that when I began to phase it out, people began to say, how come I don't see you in the newsfeed anymore? They were so used to it. They were so used to hearing me run or seeing me run my mouth on social media, sometimes through video, a lot of times through text or something else, that I became ubiquitous to them. And they began to think that I was a part of associations and networking groups and certain circles, and I wasn't part of them, but they thought I was. And I wasn't going to go out there and try to stop that.
Yeah. I see how that could be beneficial, them seeing you, and of course the message has to be clear. It has to be consistent. You can't have a sporadic approach. You're going to be, in essence, I guess, Paul, what you're talking about is just in essence being yourself. And the hope is if you're not a jerk, then you're probably going to do okay. If you're a jerk, they're going to find you out, and you probably need to go do something else other than sales or marketing, right? Because typically,
Yep.
Just because you're going to kind of work against yourself and like in some self-defeating way. But even in what you're saying, it sounds like if you're just authentic, like that authenticity is attractional. And then once you were just yourself over and over and over, it's like you were just a part of their life just because they had seen you. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's what it is. And the practical results of this, of course, is that you create what I call your own unpaid sales force. In business, if you know that the language of business is exchanging value, and then you execute on that, sooner or later you're going to have your own small tribe of raving fans.
Yeah.
Who will tell anyone that they speak to, if you need insurance, in my case, go see Paul Edwards, right? And so I would get people reaching out to me quite out of the blue saying, I've heard you're really good with social media and branding yourself on social media and that kind of thing, and I'd like to come and pick your brain for a while. And it didn't dawn on me at the time to ask, who told you that?
Yeah.
But in a way I didn't really need to, because I'm like, I think I would have a pretty good idea if it's one of these 25, 30 people where I've really created rapport, really given value without any expectation of return, and they've reciprocated.
So, and I'm trying to frame up a question just based off of what you just said. So if I rattle for just a moment, hopefully it'll come to the surface. But what I was thinking is, would it be more beneficial to have 100 deep relationships of which you can count on, or 100,000 shallow ones that might be effective and might not? For marketing purposes is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think if you're Kim Kardashian, the latter is obviously works fine. But most of us aren't Kim Kardashian, right? Thank God.
That's what I was thinking. I'm glad you said it.
Well, the CEO of Airbnb is exactly the case for the former there. He said you only need 100. You only really need 100 strong raving fans, and that will that will take you further than you might think.
It's worked out pretty well for him and his business.
Absolutely.
Turned that whole industry upside down. So, what about this? I know this is difficult to entrepreneur, anything in this space, marketing. It's hard to be told no.
Mm.
It just is. I mean, if you believe in it, and if it's your own work and you're marketing, a product or yourself or whatever it is, you believe in it. I mean, with A New Kind of Man, be honest with you, I've had a lot of no's. I'd ask people to be on the show or just interaction, and it would go, and then it would dead end. And sometimes those are kind of crushing. So how can we make it difficult for these people in our network to say no? How can we make it hard for them?
Well, I've got a brief story I can tell you on this because I've used this a couple times. But let me just start by saying, go with a giving hand. And if you don't know what to give someone, there are a few things that are, I have a couple of lists in my book, which are useful, particularly if you're dealing with somebody who's kind of high profile.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, if you're dealing with another business owner or an entrepreneur or anybody who's in the business of sales and marketing,
mm-hmm.
I find the best thing you can always give them is one more little advantage than they currently have, whatever that may be. So all of that to say, I am reluctant to show up asking for something that isn't an automatic win for the other person. So when I invite people to be on the podcast, most of the people who end up on this show are recommended to me by other people who've already appeared on it or who know me. Comparatively few just pop up out of the blue. And even fewer of those actually get past my radar because I'm simply just like everybody else. I'm like, I've got plenty of people who want to be on my show.
Right.
Why should I respond just because you sent me an email? So that's one part of it. The other part of it, obviously, Chad, is when you show up, I believe in building a case, right? Just like you would build a case for anything else. Just try proposing marriage to the first girl you meet on the street if you don't believe me.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to build a case, right? So here's the story, right? And somebody both you and I deeply admire, John Eldredge. John Eldredge is the founder of Ransomed Heart Ministries. He is an extraordinarily busy human being. He has imminent demands on his time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Somebody wants something.
Yeah.
Even if it's people like his family, where he should be giving them something, right? He doesn't have time to comb through 10,000 emails that drop into his inbox every second. I know that. He talks about it on the podcast if you listen, but you don't have to listen to know that. If you're changing that many lives, you don't have to know he doesn't read every email. In fact, he probably doesn't read 99% of them. Right. He probably has somebody filtering through it to figure out what needs to go to him, and the rest just gets, kept in a safe storage somewhere. I'm not saying that's the case, but that would be my imagination.
Right.
I have read every book he's written. I'm a Ransomed Heart Tribe member. I listen to every podcast they put out. I repeatedly deep dive into all their content. I'm a huge fan. I love it. And you would think, well, that sounds like a good reason. No, actually, it's not a good reason for him to just drop everything and come on my show. But I said I could build a case for this. So after I went to Wild at Heart Boot Camp, this was 2017. At the end of the year, 2018, that's when I started doing my podcast again. And I had met Morgan Snyder, who's one of his right-hand men there at Ransomed Heart. And while I was at boot camp, and I said, I wonder if he'd be open to an interview. And so I just sent him an email. I could figure out his email address. And I said, look, Morgan, you probably don't remember meeting me at boot camp. I was there in August of 2017. I'm starting up a podcast. I really liked this topic that you discussed recently and wondered if you'd be willing to come and discuss it with my entrepreneurial audience. And it worked. Morgan wrote back and said, yeah, actually I would. I don't get the chance to be on that many podcasts that aren't specifically aimed at the kingdom. So, that sounds great. So he came and appeared. It was October of 2018. And I was like, okay, that's one notch, right? In 2019, I emailed Morgan's assistant and I said, what about Alan Arnold, who also appears on John's podcast? Do you think he'd be open to an interview? And Alan, he's their director of content, but he's also an author. He's also, coaches people on how to write stories and fiction and all that. And so Alan came on my show. And of course, I'm not just doing it with these guys. I'm also, Rabbi Daniel Lapin comes on my show, and Aaron Walker comes on my show, and, notable names in the kingdom are on my show. So when the time came, and I asked, what would be is John coming out with any books in the future? And they said, oh yeah, he's got this new one coming out called Get Your Life Back. And it's due out in February. So I said, okay, a little notch on my calendar for January, right? And I'm able to send in a document and say, this is an opportunity for John to appear on the show. And here's why he might want to do it. Number one, 2 of his best buddies have already done it, plus 2 or 3 other big names in the kingdom. Plus it's a Ransomed Heart boot camp alumnus who's read every book he's ever written and can speak fluently to the content and has his own testimonial, right?
Yep.
And plus all he's got, we make it simple. I know the bio. You don't I've got the headshot. You don't even have to send anything. All you got to do is reply yes or no. Right. And this is to his publicist, not to him. And I got a yes. So I built a case, right? I go with a giving hand and I build a case. And I make, if you want to make it difficult for people to say no, you've just got to, you got to go 1,000 miles deep with them. There's a third part of this, which I think is equally important. And that is that you remain, that no is always an option. You can't be afraid of no. It's just that most people want to get to yes far too quickly, right? There's always a chance that something will come up that this just isn't a fit for me. Okay, yeah, of course. It doesn't make sense, so let's not do it. But what I tell people is try to find out the reasons you shouldn't do business first. Because if you can discuss them and overcome them and eliminate them, that leaves only one possible answer, and that's yes.
Right. Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's considerate too, because, I can just tell you podcasting, just as to get podcast guests, it's not everybody's as gracious as you were, where they say, yeah, let's do it. Let's set it up. Let's put it on the calendar. It's going to be great. We're going to help men. Not everybody's like that. And so this was a little bit easier, but yet sometimes it takes that continual work and to the latter approach, I guess, if you want to use that to say, okay, it's going with an open hand. It's going back, petitioning time and time and time again. But I mean, for you to get John Eldredge on your show, it's a great example because there's a lot of work there. You could have just said, directly right to John, okay, and just kind of gone in, just kind of haphazardly, hey, here's an opportunity. It's my podcast. This is, blah, 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 blah. And then it's about you.
Yeah.
So every part of that example is true to your message of saying, it's an open hand, John, this is a great opportunity. You have access to my audience. And also, hey, it just so happens that you have a new book coming out and we would love to talk about it. So yeah, I think that's a valuable thing. And I also think that sometimes just in the fast-paced way that I live, and perhaps some of the listeners live, it's like they want that quick yes just so they don't have to work at it. And it's like, oh, I got a yes, moving on, going to the next thing. Like, yes, thank you, I'm moving on. And if they get that no, maybe they just stop there. And maybe that no is actually not a solid no. Maybe it's just, hey, I need you to open the door. The door's not open, but I need you to open the door. So maybe that no is, again, something that we have to come to terms with, like you just mentioned, Paul, of, hey, that is a possible answer. So let's try and think about, why would this particular person say no? Why would they
Yeah.
not want to have us on the show? Why would they not want our service?
Hmm.
And then eliminate those excuses and
Yeah,
reasons.
it's one of the reasons the word tells us, in regard to evil, be infants, but in your thinking, be adults.
Yes,
This is getting a no the first time to a self-interested question is a childish way of thinking.
exactly.
It's like, gimme, 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 no. Right?
Right.
Well, okay, fine, but we're men now, right?
Mm-hmm.
That time is over. That was
Yes.
fine when you were 8.
Yes.
Right now you're an adult man, you've got a wife, children, or
Yeah.
responsibilities, you own a business. The world doesn't work that simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And scripture is abundantly clear on that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And I'm not criticizing here. I had my own version of, and still have my own version of, taking another lap through kindergarten on the ascending spiral and saying,
Right.
oh boy, I'm back to being 13-year-old me here again.
Right.
Um,
What?
but so I'm not scolding, just real quick. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
scolding people. Don't hear that in my voice, but
Mm-hmm.
do understand, if you're a man, then boyhood has got to be left behind.
Then act like a man.
Yeah. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me.
That's right. That's right. You know, and the thing is, it's like there are those childlike, characteristics or tendencies that come back, right? Especially where do they usually render themselves out? It's like guys can go and they can go into the gym and they feel awesome. They look in the mirror and it's like, wow, I'm getting gains. I'm lifting more weight. I'm doing whatever. I'm whatever the goal is. If you're a runner, maybe you're not going to be jacked with muscles, but you're going to lean, you're going to become more lean. You look at the stopwatch. It's like, hey, this is a faster mile. You see all that. Intellectually, we may say, I've just consumed this many books and I've done this and I've done this. And spiritually, you can even say, hey, I've done this. And I'm not saying that these are always the best approach, but people could say, well, spiritually, I'm doing fine because I'm generous and I'm giving and I serve to my local church. And I try and do what I can around the house, but yet relationships they tend to be the Achilles heel of men.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
it's men, what I've seen in my experience in working with men for the last 18 years is they can go from, hey, I'm a man and now this is whatever the case may be. Maybe they get a no from their wife. Maybe, they get a no from their kids. They get a no from a friend or something they just don't like. And it's like automatically they go back to being a child relationally. So it
Yeah.
seems like that area is the one that we really, really struggle with.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we don't know how to solve the problem, number one.
Mm.
And also, I found this with my sons. Even if someone tries to teach us how to solve the problem, our pride blinds us.
Right.
Right. And that was what plagued me for so many years. As a matter of fact, it's only in the last about year and a half or so that I have really begun to take a hatchet to my pride.
Mm.
And because most people think pride means being a pompous, braggadocious blowhard. No, it doesn't. No, you can be a very modest, quiet, soft-spoken, prideful bastard.
Right.
Right? You can be a very stubborn, I'm going to do it my way, but you're very smooth and clean on the outside. Wouldn't harm a fly. I'm just doing it my way.
Right.
No, son, that's not the case. You have a father
Mm-hmm.
who loves you, but frankly, knows way more than you do about what's good for you and what's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I think is it's in those other three areas, and they happen to be the pillars of the work. I think we get a lot more accolades in those. If you do well at work, right, you get a raise or you get to work more, and maybe you don't get a raise, but you get to work more. If you do well at the gym, you put on more weight on the bar. If you do better in running, then you trim those numbers down. Whatever the case may be, intellectually, it's the same thing. You can gain all sort of intellectual properties and learn and grow. But yet when it comes to relationships, we try and hide in all those other strengths, which then infuses more pride as a way of compensating for the thing that we lack, which is in relationships.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, because we're not taught, nor do we instinctively grasp, as ladies tend to have a better handle on doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a I don't want to mischaracterize this and have a bunch of guys think, well, all I got to do is act more like a woman. I'm not talking about that. We can have our own version of this, right?
Absolutely.
That's still masculine and still projects
Yeah.
confidence and strength and all of the God-given abilities that we have.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they have a more communal way of understanding the world.
Mm-hmm.
They really do much more embrace the idea that we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why historically, traditionally, women have been the connectors of the family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the connectors in the neighborhoods, the social coordinators of the thing. And the men just don't do a whole lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
But to sort of piggyback off of what you're saying there, we're deficient that way, but we don't need to be. And and the other thing that we're not taught, and which frankly isn't emphasized for us, is that relationships are an opportunity for service that
Yes.
brings pleasure to the heart of God.
Mm-hmm.
They are an opportunity for you to use all of that drive and energy and stamina and talent and aptitude you have to bless another person, because what causes in the spiritual, what causes success and reciprocity and blessing and all of that to flow to you is an attitude of service
Yes.
as opposed to an attitude of entitlement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a common thread too, even when we talked about the marketing piece, because being open-handed in, if you're trying to connect with someone through networking, it's going into it open-handed. And it's the same thing in relationships. I'm really glad you
Mhm.
said that, Paul, because at the end of the day, I can tell you that in the 26 years that I've been married, the ones that have been the most fruitful is one that I had a heart to serve her well
Mhm.
and to serve my kids well. And I can tell you, whenever I've been passive or whenever I've ignored that or whenever I've been apathetic or just pathetic, I can tell you that the marriage wasn't flourishing like it's supposed to be, you
Yeah.
know? And so, and it's very much that open-handed way of living that I think it makes the world a better place. It glorifies God, but it makes just the world a better place.
Mhm. Yep.
So as we, kind of wind the conversation down, we didn't even really get into the second book. Maybe that'll be another podcast that we need to do. But we've been talking about relational capital, and what types of things would you say to a man so they can help gain some relational capital with people around them, but maybe an audience even beyond them? So thinking of at home in their sphere so they can gain more relational capital, types of things that men can do to connect where they are at home, but then also for those who are the entrepreneurs or those who are wanting to network.
Well, in my most recent book called Business Beyond Business, I have a chapter there called How to Network with Dream Connections. And the main thrust of it is, what do you do when you get in front of a celebrity or an influencer or a very recognizable public figure?
Mm.
But the fifth, I lay out about 5 different components of it. And the fifth one is called Focus on the Farm Team. And I I don't want people to start thinking of their wives and children as the farm team. However, I do want them to borrow from the principle and say, if I do for my wife and children the kind of things that I would do to get the attention of a celebrity,
Mm.
influencer, public figure, for business reasons, whether that's to do business with them directly or to have an alliance with them that benefits me strategically in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
What could be the practical outcomes of that, right? And of course, we all know the answer. It's going to get better, because
Mm-hmm.
if you approach that from a sincere attitude of I'm here to serve, right? Um, I use this every morning when I wake up. One of the first things that comes out of my mouth is, "Thank you, Father, for the privilege of serving you by serving your other children."
Hmm.
Whether I get paid for it or not, I know I'll get paid. I know I know I can trust you with my financial future.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to focus on serving as best I can. But if you start to do some of the things like that, you're going to have to find, depending on who you're doing it for, you're going to have to find tailored versions of it that work for that person.
Hmm.
But it's really about paying attention to what motivates people and what gets them excited, and what could, by the same extension, what upsets them and turns them into, spitting cobras and that kind of thing. Don't do that. Right.
Yeah.
So if you're, if your wife has more of a love language of acts of service, then go do chores around the house.
By all means, do it, right?
But if she doesn't give a rip about that, she's quite happy to do all the housework, but she wants you to sit there and listen to her, talk about her day for 30 minutes straight, then sit there and shut up and listen.
Yeah.
It's not that hard. And of course, it doesn't mean that you sit there and just sort of check out. It means that you're sitting there listening, and you're making eye contact, and you're asking questions, and you're trying to get her to keep talking.
Active listening, right?
Mm-hmm. So again, simple principles, but not so simplistic tactics. They vary, and you can't do with one what you've done with another. So it's not you have a hammer and the whole world's a nail.
Well, I love that. And I want to finish our conversation with something we didn't get to, but I think that it really just adds value. And that's actually three big questions that you talk about in Business Beyond Business in that book. And within it is the 5 tips for networking. And you say, ask 3 big questions. And not only is it beneficial for networking, but also I think of just maybe for the guy who's just looking for the bump to say, well, how can I actually connect? Communication's hard for them. They're having a difficult time in relating to their wife or their kids, or maybe to a friend or their parents or their neighbor. And I love these 3 big questions, because these become questions you can ask at any time in any given day, because as the events of our days unfold, they are different. There's little nuances of difference in our days. So these 3 big questions, man, I'll just leave you with this. And these are Paul's big questions. So these, I can't take any credit. So just a way to kind of bump the conversation forward. First question is this: what is going well for you? What is going well for you? Second question: what's not going well for you? Third question: what are you looking forward to? All of a sudden, in a networking sense, it's like, okay, you're not talking about the weather. You're not talking about insurance, right? You're not talking about that. You're not talking about what everybody else is talking about. You've already gotten to like just a slightly introductory, but still a slightly deeper level to say, hey, what are you interested in? What's going well for you? What's not going well? And then you can go a myriad of different directions. And if men, you would actually do that with the people in your direct relational circle, watch your relationships flourish, because it isn't about
just try
you.
It out.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And here's the thing, and this may be weird, but even find somebody who you can trust, who's not going to judge you, and who's not going to, you're going to have some good rowdy fun, but maybe they'll rib you, but yet they value the practice. Maybe to go to somebody you do know and ask them questions and have them pitch you different answers, just so you're not on your heels trying to have these, trying to have conversation starters and to continue the conversation. Whatever the case may be, find a trusted voice. Maybe it's your wife, maybe it's your girlfriend, maybe it's just a close friend. Do it over a beer, do it while you're watching a game, do something like that whenever all this stuff is cleared up. But I think these 3 big questions help us not only when it comes to relationships at home, but also in the sphere of networking and business. So any last words with that, Paul?
I'll just say purely for the sake of humor that I didn't come up with those questions either. I stole them from Vince Del Monte. So he already promised me he wouldn't sue.
Awesome. So there you go. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was like, man, you're cleaning house here to make sure you're not going to get sued. So that's good.
I like to say I didn't design this universe. I just live in it.
Yep. True.
And so what people often pass off as original really isn't original.
Yeah.
It,
There's
they
nothing
also
new under
stole
the
it
sun.
they also stole it from somebody else,
That's
and
exactly right.
we're all biting off of our creator,
Yeah.
who's happy to feed us. So
Yeah. There you go.
let him carry on.
There you go. So you men out there on Instagram, you found a quote, but you took the credit when you know it was something you read in somebody else's book. You're found out, just so you know. Just
Yeah,
own it.
we got a camera trained on you and everything.
Exactly. We know what's up.
The other thing that occurs to me, Chad, is I should mention, like I said, I'm here to serve, but anybody who would like to get a free digital copy of Business Beyond Business, as well as a couple of tools that I've acquired that I pass out. I also stole those from Aaron Walker. But there's a spouse assessment where your
Wow.
spouse assesses you. There's a personal assessment you fill out, and then there's a goals and dreams worksheet. Those three are all available along with a copy of the book. You just go to my, we've got a special URL that I sent you. So it's thepaulsedwards.com/new kind of man.
Yeah.
New kind of man. Okay. So the Paul S as in Simon Edwards.com/new kind of man.
Awesome. Yep. I'll put that in the show notes and they'll be able to get linked right into it. Paul, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And maybe we need to do this again up the road, and I can give the latest book, and then even maybe the third book, we can give that another run and see if we can help some men.
I'd be delighted to, Chad. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.